The old apartment smelled of dust and unfulfilled promises, a scent that clung to the worn furniture and the faded wallpaper, a constant reminder of a life that was far from the dreams Alina had once held close. Her daughter, 6-year-old Lily, was a tiny, vibrant splash of color in this gray world, a whirlwind of boundless energy and innocent joy that was often tempered by a quiet understanding of their strained circumstances. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon, and the chill from the single, drafty window seemed to settle directly into Elena's bones. She was in the kitchen, trying to stretch the last bit of ground meat into a passable dinner, her mind miles away, lost in a spiral of worry over the mounting bills and the ominous, threatening phone calls that had become a daily torment. The doorbell, a sharp, jarring sound, cut through the silence, making her jump, a small involuntary movement of dread. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was too early for a friend, too late for a regular delivery. Her heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs, a premonition of danger that was as chilling as the air. Lily, who had been sitting quietly at a small kitchen table, drawing with a set of well-used crayons, looked up, her large brown eyes wide with a sudden dawning apprehension. "Mama, who is it?" she asked, her voice a small, hesitant whisper. "I am not sure, sweetie," Elena said, trying to force a reassuring smile that felt more like a grimace. Maybe it is just a mistake, but she knew it was not. The knock on the door that followed was not a knock at all. It was a loud, impatient pounding, a series of sharp, authoritative thumps that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the old building. She motioned for Lily to stay put and went to the door, her hands trembling as she reached for the knob. Taking a deep breath, she unlatched the lock and pulled the door open a crack. The two men on the other side were a familiar, terrifying sight. They were not dressed in suits. They were dressed in cheap, ill-fitting jackets that bulged in a way that suggested they were hiding something. They were burly. Their faces were grim and hard, and they looked at her with an expression of open, contemptuous impatience. The man in front, the one who had done the knocking, was a stocky man with a crew cut and a face that looked as though it had been carved from granite. The man behind him was taller, leaner, with a cruel smirk on his lips. "Elena Santos," the first man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was more of a statement than a question. "Yes, that is me," she said, her voice a thin, shaky thread. She tried to keep her chin up, to project a bravery she did not feel. "We are here for the payment," he said, his eyes narrowing to small, hard slits. "We are tired of playing games." I told you," Elena said, her voice growing more desperate. "I have no money. He has not sent me anything. I do not know where he is. I do not know how I can pay you." "That is not our problem, lady," the taller man said, his smirk widening into a sneer. "Your husband owes a debt, and that debt has come due. One way or another, we are going to collect." Elena's eyes widened in fear. "Please, I beg you, you have to understand. I am a single mother. I am doing my best. I do not even know what the debt is for. He left a long time ago. I have no idea where he is." The granite-faced man let out a short, humorless laugh. "He is Julian Thorne, is he not? The big-shot entrepreneur, the man with the golden touch. He has plenty of money. He just has a very short memory when it comes to his responsibilities. He made a very bad business deal. And now, you are going to pay the price." The name hit Elena like a physical blow. Julian Thorne, the man she had loved, the man who was Lily's father. He had been a man of grand schemes and big ideas, but they had always lived a simple life. He had never been a big shot to her. His sudden, unexplained disappearance had been a mystery that had haunted her for years, a wound that had never truly healed. She had told herself he had just gone, a coward who could not face the responsibilities of a family, a man who had left them for a better life. Now it seemed, he had left them to face the consequences of his actions. The taller man took a menacing step forward, and Elena instinctively stepped back, her body pressing against the door. "We are not leaving without something of value," he said, his eyes scanning the meager contents of the apartment with a look of undisguised contempt. "We are going to take the television. Or maybe the girls' toys. We are going to teach you a lesson." Lily, from her hiding place behind the kitchen table, had been listening to everything. The low, menacing tones of the men's voices, the desperate, pleading sound of her mother's, the sharp, cruel laugh. Her heart was a frantic, terrified bird trapped in her chest, beating its wings against her ribs, and she could not bear to hear her mother's voice filled with such fear. She looked at her mother, her beautiful, brave mother, her face now pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a terror that was so profound it made Lily's stomach hurt. She knew she had to do something. She had to stop them. Without thinking, she came out from behind the table, a small, trembling figure in a bright pink dress. Her face was streaked with tears, and her little hands were clasped in front of her, a silent, helpless plea. She looked up at the two huge men, her small body shaking with a terror that was so immense it felt like it would swallow her whole. And she looked at her mother, who was now staring at her, her eyes filled with a new kind of fear, a fear for her child. "Please," Lily sobbed, the sound a broken, high-pitched wail that seemed to fill the entire apartment. "Please, do not hurt us." The taller man's cruel smirk widened into a grin of pure malice. He looked down at the tiny, trembling child, and his eyes held a cold, predatory gleam. "Oh, look at that," he said, his voice a mocking coo. "The little princess is here to save the day. How adorable." He took a step forward, his hand reaching out, not for Alina, but for Lily, a gesture of pure, unadulterated cruelty, a move meant to terrorize them both. Alina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, a silent scream of horror. "No," she cried, her voice choked with a desperate plea. But it was too late. He was already so close, his hand was so large a menacing shadow that was about to fall upon her daughter. The silence was deafening, the air thick with fear. The very walls of the apartment seemed to hold their breath. The moment stretched on, an eternity of pure, unadulterated terror. Suddenly, a loud, thunderous sound shattered the silence, a sound that was so unexpected, so powerful, that it made the two men flinch, their bodies recoiling instinctively. The front door of the apartment, the door that Alina had only just cracked open, flew inward with a violent crash, its hinges groaning in protest as it slammed against the wall. Standing in the doorway, a towering, imposing figure framed by the afternoon light, was a man who looked completely out of place in their humble apartment. He was dressed in a pristine, perfectly tailored suit, a man who exuded an air of power and wealth that was so profound it was almost a physical thing. A face that was a sharper, more mature version of Lily's, was a mask of furious, unbridled rage. His eyes, the same warm brown as Lily's, were now blazing with a cold, righteous fury, a fury that was 1,000 times more terrifying than the men's cruelty. He took a step into the apartment, his gaze sweeping over the scene, from the terrified, sobbing Lily to the pale, trembling Alina to the two men who now stood frozen in a state of bewildered shock, their earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a dawning terrible comprehension. The sound of his voice was a deep, resonant shout, a sound that seemed to shake the very walls, a sound that was filled with a furious, unyielding command. "What do you think you are doing?" he roared, his voice filled with such an intimidating authority that the two men instinctively took a step back, their faces now a sickly shade of pale. "Get your hands off my family." The taller man, the one with the cruel smirk, found his voice, a shaky, stammering whisper that was a far cry from his earlier sneer. We were just collecting a debt, sir, a debt that belongs to a Julian Thorne." The man in the suit laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that was filled with a chilling menace. "I know," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that was far more terrifying than his earlier shout, "because I am Julian Thorne." The words hung in the air, a silent, powerful pronouncement that seemed to suck all the air from the room. The two men's eyes widened in a horrified, dawning comprehension. Their faces were now a perfect mask of utter gut-wrenching dread. They knew his name, they knew his face, they knew who he was. They knew that Julian Thorne was not just a big shot entrepreneur. He was a titan, a man who owned half of the city, a man who had connections and power that were far beyond their simple, petty cruelty. He was a man you did not cross, a man whose family you did not threaten. We did not know, sir," the granite-faced man stammered, his body now trembling with a fear that was palpable. "We were just following orders. We did not know you were related to them. You did not know," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He took another step into the apartment, his presence so overwhelming that the two men instinctively took another step back, their bodies pressing against the wall, trying to escape from the very air that he breathed. "Did you not hear my daughter begging? Did you not see the terror in my wife's eyes? You do not need to know who I am to know that what you were doing was wrong. You do not need to know my name to know that threatening a woman and her child is a vile, disgusting act." The men's faces were now a perfect, sickening shade of gray. Their eyes were wide with a terror that was so profound it was almost a form of silent begging. They knew they were done. They knew their lives were over. They had made a mistake so profound, so grievous that they could not possibly hope to recover from it. Julian's phone, a sleek, expansive-looking device, was already in his hand. He did not look at the men. He did not need to. He simply held it to his ear and spoke into it, his voice a low, precise command. "Get me the boss, the man who sent these two. Tell him his contract has been terminated. Tell him I am suing him for every last penny he has. Tell him he will be spending the rest of his life in prison for harassment and extortion, and then have these two arrested. I want them to pay for what they have done, and I want them to pay for a very, very long time." He hung up the phone and looked at the two men, a look of cold, unyielding fury still blazing in his eyes. The two men, a pair of once terrifying enforcers, now looked like two children who had been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Their faces were pale, their bodies were trembling, and they were a picture of complete, utter, pathetic defeat. "Get out," Julian said, his voice a low, final, terrifying command. "Get out of my house before I have to ask you again." The men did not hesitate. They scrambled past him. Their movements were uncoordinated and clumsy. Their bodies were a tangle of limbs as they ran for the door. They did not look back. They did not say another word. They were gone. The apartment was filled with a profound, terrifying silence, a silence that was a stark contrast to the shouting and the screaming that had filled the air just moments before. Julian stood in the middle of the room. His body was tense and rigid. His hands were clenched into tight, hard fists at his sides. He was still a figure of immense, intimidating power, but now, the anger was gone, replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sadness. He turned, his eyes searching for the source of his sorrow, and he saw them. His wife Elena was standing near the kitchen table. Her body was still trembling. Her face was a mask of pale, stunned disbelief, and his daughter, his beautiful, terrified daughter, was standing just a few feet away. Her little hands were still clasped in front of her. Her face was a tear-streaked canvas of fear. She did not run to him. She did not run to him to hug him. She simply stood there, a small, solitary figure, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror, a terror of this imposing stranger, this man who was her father, this man who she had not seen since she was just a baby, a man who had now appeared out of nowhere to save them, a man who had yelled and shouted and who had sent two men away in a flash of power and a flash of fear. Julian's body went limp, his shoulders slumped, and the rage that had filled him just moments before drained away, leaving him empty and tired. He took a hesitant step toward them, his hands now open, a gesture of peace, a gesture of a plea. "Elena," he said. His voice was a low, broken whisper, a sound that was filled with such a profound, heartbreaking sadness that it seemed to fill the entire room. "Lily, my little Lily." Lily took a step back, her body recoiling from him. Her eyes were still wide with fear, and the sight of it, the sight of his own daughter being afraid of him, was a physical blow, a wound that was so deep and so painful that it made his very soul ache. Elena, her voice, still a little shaky, was finally able to speak. Her words were filled with a cold, cutting anger that was a stark contrast to her earlier fear. "Julian," she said. Her voice was a low, dangerous hiss. "Where have you been? Where have you been while our lives were falling apart? Where have you been while I have been trying to raise our daughter alone? Where have you been while I have been drowning in debt?" He flinched. Her words were a series of blows, each one landing with a precise, devastating accuracy. I am so sorry, Elena," he said. His voice was filled with a deep, heart-wrenching remorse. "I am so sorry. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to be here. I just I had to come. I heard," she said. Her voice was rising in a sudden, furious crescendo. You heard the rumors, the whispers, the threats. You heard that your family was in danger and you decided to show up now that they were at our door, now that they were threatening our daughter. What kind of man are you?" He had no answer for her. He had no excuse. He had no words that could possibly convey the depth of his regret, the profound and terrible shame that had been building inside him for years. He had no way of explaining the life he had lived, the life he had built, a life of immense power and wealth that was, in the end, empty and meaningless without them. "I am a coward," he said, his voice a low, raw whisper that was filled with a profound and terrible admission. "I am a coward, Elena. I left because I was in trouble. I was in so much trouble that I thought the only way to protect you both was to leave. I thought if I disappeared, if I just vanished, that they would never find you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was keeping you safe. I was so stupid. I was so incredibly wrong." His voice broke a raw, emotional sound that was filled with a grief that was so profound it was almost a physical thing. He looked at Lily, his little girl, the one he had left behind, the one he had tried to protect in his own foolish, cowardly way, and his eyes filled with tears, hot, cleansing tears that were a testament to the years of silent regret and unspoken pain that he had carried with him. He knelt down. His movements were slow and deliberate, a gesture of a man who was humbled, a man who was defeated, and he came to Lily's level. His eyes were now filled with a quiet, powerful sadness, a sadness that was a million miles away from the furious rage that had filled them just moments before. He reached out his hand, a slow, hesitant gesture, a gesture of a man who was afraid, a man who did not know if he would be rejected. And he said in a voice that was now filled with a gentle, loving tenderness, a voice that was as soft as a whisper, "Lily, my sweet Lily, I am your father, and I am so very, very sorry that I was not here. I am so sorry that I let you be afraid. I am so sorry that I was not here to protect you." Lily looked at his hand, a hand that was so large, so warm, so different from the hands of the men that had just been there, and she looked at his face, a face that was a sharper, more mature version of her own, a face that was now filled with a sadness that mirrored her own, and she saw the tears in his eyes, and she felt a small, hesitant spark of something that was not fear, but a quiet, fragile hope. Slowly, carefully, she reached out her own small hand and she placed it in his, a gesture of a child who was willing to forgive, a child who was willing to give her father a second chance at being a family, a second chance at being a father. And Julian's hand closed around hers, a gentle, protective embrace, a silent promise that he would never let her go, a promise that he would never let her be afraid again. The apartment was still a mess. The door was off its hinges and the dust was still a fine, invisible film in the air. But now, it was no longer a place of fear. It was no longer a place of despair. It was a place of hope. It was a place of new beginnings. It was a place where a little girl had just found her father. A place where a family was about to be made whole. A place where a shout had been replaced with a whisper. A place where a tear had been replaced with a smile. A place where life had been given a second chance.